I didn't see it coming. Not at all. We're cutting her off. My mom's voice was sharp, cold, like a knife twisting in my chest. I was standing right outside the door, hiding in the hallway, holding my breath, hearing everything. She didn't even care if I overheard. She was talking to Kara, my cousin, about how they'd get rid of me. Like I was some unwanted thing. She's a liability, we can't have her tied to the family business any longer. The betrayal felt like a punch to the gut. They were my family, my flesh and blood, and they were already planning to throw me away. I stood there, frozen, my heart beating so loud I thought it would drown out their words. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wanted to scream, to confront them right then and there. But I didn't. I just walked away. And in that moment I realized I was done. My name is Mira, and that was the day my family made it clear they didn't care about me. So I decided I'd make it without them. The hallway felt endless as I walked away from that door, from that conversation, from everything I thought I knew about my place in this world. The moment I heard them plotting behind my back, something inside me snapped. I had always been the perfect daughter. Quiet, obedient, doing everything they asked. I helped with their business paperwork, answered phones, organized files, and never complained about working for free. And this was how they repaid me. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask for an explanation. I just left. I packed my bags and walked out of the house that night, while they were all asleep. My world as I knew it was over. But that was the moment I understood I didn't need them. I had to make it on my own. The look on my father's face the next morning when he saw my empty room was something I never witnessed, but I imagined it. He tried calling my phone repeatedly, but I'd already made my decision. I walked out that door carrying everything I owned in 2 small suitcases and a backpack. The cool morning air hit my face as I stepped onto the street, and for the first time in my life I was completely alone. But I was also completely free. No more walking on eggshells. No more trying to prove my worth to people who would never see it. The night I left I had no plan. I didn't know where I was going or how I would survive. I found a cheap motel for the first week, then rented a small apartment with what little savings I had. The place was tiny, barely bigger than a closet, but it was mine. The walls were thin, the neighbors were loud, and the heating didn't work properly, but I didn't care. I took a job at a rundown cafe to pay the rent. Everything was terrifying. I had nothing left but my pride and the burning desire to prove them wrong. Every day felt like I was climbing a mountain. The cafe smelled like old coffee and broken dreams, but I worked there with everything I had. My boss, an older woman named Dolores, was kind but stern. She taught me how to make the perfect espresso and how to smile even when customers were rude. The work was hard, my feet ached every night, and I barely made enough to cover my basic needs. But I refused to quit. I would lie in my tiny bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The silence in my apartment was deafening compared to the constant noise and chaos of my family home. I spent my nights alone in the tiny apartment, the weight of my decision crushing me. The silence was deafening. I would lie awake wondering if I'd made the right choice. Could have gone back. My family would have forgiven me if I'd just apologized and begged for their mercy. But I couldn't do that. Not after what they'd said. Not after everything they took from me. The loneliness was the worst part. I had no friends to call, no one to share my fears with. My phone stayed silent for days at a time, except for the occasional call from my parents that I never answered. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for it to call home, but I'd stop myself every time. I knew they were probably going about their lives as if nothing had happened, as if I had never existed. The apartment felt like a prison some nights, but it was also my sanctuary. It was the first place that was truly mine, even if it wasn't much. I decorated it with flowers I bought from the corner store with my tip money, trying to make it feel like home. The walls were bare except for a single motivational poster I'd found at a thrift store that read, "Success is the best revenge." Months passed in this routine of work, sleep, and solitude. I was getting stronger, but I was also getting tired of serving coffee to people who treated me like I was invisible. One day everything changed. As I was serving coffee at the cafe, Aiden, an old classmate from high school, walked in. He was surprised to see me behind the counter, but after the shock wore off, he insisted on buying me coffee during my break. He asked how I was doing, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. We talked for hours after my shift ended. He told me about the startup he was working for, how they were looking for people with fresh perspectives and strong work ethics. I told him about leaving my family, though I kept most of the painful details to myself. He listened without judgment, which meant everything to me. When he offered me a job at the startup, I thought, why not? It was a chance to try something new, a chance to get away from my old life and the cafe that smelled like other people's dreams. The cafe had been a stepping stone, a place to catch my breath and figure out my next move. But I knew I was meant for something bigger. Aiden saw potential in me that I didn't even know existed, and that conversation changed everything about my future. Joining the startup was the biggest risk I'd ever taken. I had no experience in the tech world, no college degree, no family connections to fall back on. I had no idea what I was doing half the time. But I was determined to prove I could succeed on my own terms. It wasn't easy. I felt like an imposter in a room full of people who knew what they were doing. They spoke in acronyms I didn't understand and discussed concepts that went completely over my head. But slowly, very slowly, I started picking things up. I stayed late every night, reading everything I could find about the industry. I watched YouTube tutorials, took free online courses, and asked questions even when I felt stupid doing it. My co-workers were patient with me, especially Aiden, who became my unofficial mentor and biggest supporter. The startup atmosphere was exciting and chaotic all at once. We worked in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls, barely functioning air conditioning, and mismatched furniture that we'd bought secondhand. But there was an energy there, a sense that we were building something important, something that could change the world. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I was part of something bigger than myself, and my contribution actually mattered. After working at the startup for 6 months, learning everything I could and proving my worth day by day, I finally got my big break. I landed my first major client, completely on my own. I'll never forget the look of shock and pride on Aiden's face when I told him the news. He had always believed in me, but even he hadn't expected me to pull it off so quickly. That victory felt so sweet, like I had finally taken a real step away from the life my family had trapped me in. It was concrete proof that I didn't need their money, their connections, or their approval to succeed. The client was a small business owner named Patricia who needed help with their online marketing presence. I worked with her for weeks, learning her business inside and out, understanding her customers and her goals. When the campaign launched and her sales doubled in the first month, I felt a rush of pride and accomplishment I'd never experienced before. My boss called me into his office the next day and offered me a promotion with a significant raise. I was no longer the scared girl who served coffee for tips. I was no longer the daughter who wasn't good enough for her own family. I was Mira, the account manager who got real results for real people. That night, I celebrated alone in my apartment with a bottle of wine and takeout pizza, and it was the best meal I'd ever had. Success felt incredible, but it also brought unexpected challenges. The worst part was how it reminded me constantly of my past and the family I'd left behind. My mom started calling regularly, leaving voicemails asking if I'd come home. She said they'd sorted things out, and that everything could go back to the way it was before. She spoke as if I'd just been on a little vacation and now it was time to come back to reality. I didn't even listen to the whole messages anymore. I would delete them immediately, but not before feeling that familiar stab of pain. Going back was never an option, and she should have known that. The sound of her voice brought back all the hurt I'd been trying so hard to forget and move past. She spoke as if nothing had happened, as if their betrayal meant nothing, as if calling me a liability and planning to cut me off was just a minor misunderstanding. But I remembered every word they'd said about me being worthless to the family business. I remembered the cold calculation in their eyes when they decided I wasn't worth keeping around. They wanted me back now, probably because they needed something from me or because their business wasn't doing as well as they'd hoped. But I wasn't their backup plan anymore. I was building my own life, creating my own success, and they had no place in it. I kept pushing forward every day, refusing to let the past define my future or limit my potential. My career started taking off in ways I'd never imagined possible. I was promoted again at the startup, and people throughout the industry were beginning to take notice of my work. Industry publications mentioned my campaigns, and other companies tried to recruit me. I still couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider sometimes, though. Every time I succeeded, every time I reached a new milestone, I was reminded of how my family had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. But that reminder also fueled my determination to keep going, to keep proving them wrong. I worked harder than anyone else in the office. I was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. I volunteered for the most difficult projects that others avoided, and I always delivered exceptional results. My colleagues started coming to me for advice and guidance, which felt completely surreal. Just 2 years ago, I was serving coffee to strangers and wondering if I'd made a huge mistake leaving home. Now I was being recognized as one of the rising stars in a competitive industry. The transformation felt almost too good to be true, but I'd earned every bit of it through sheer determination, countless sleepless nights, and an unshakable belief that I deserved better than what my family had offered me. About a year after I'd started making real progress in my career, I received an unexpected message from Kara, my cousin who'd been part of that original conversation about cutting me off. She wanted to meet in person. She said she regretted everything that had happened and that she wanted to apologize face to face. Part of me was curious about what she had to say, but a bigger part of me didn't trust her motives. I didn't need her apology or anyone else's. I had already forgiven them all in my own way, not for their sake but for my own peace of mind. But I didn't go to the meeting she suggested. I couldn't trust any of them anymore, and I wasn't about to open that door again. Kara had been there during that horrible conversation when they decided to cut me off. She had nodded along and agreed with their decision to throw me away like I was nothing more than garbage. Her sudden change of heart felt hollow and calculated. Maybe they'd heard about my success through mutual friends or industry connections. Maybe they wanted to reconnect now that I was making something of myself and could potentially benefit them again. But relationships don't work that way. You can't betray someone so completely and then expect them to welcome you back with open arms just because you've decided it's convenient. I'd learned to live without them, and I was genuinely better for it. The message sat in my phone for several days before I finally deleted it. I didn't need that connection to my painful past anymore. As I continued to grow and thrive in my career, I met new people who genuinely believed in me and my potential. Aiden remained one of my closest friends and strongest supporters, and I began to lean on him and others more. These people became my chosen family, the support system I'd never had growing up. With their encouragement and unwavering belief in my abilities, I found the confidence to pitch my own business idea. The concept had been growing in my mind for months. A startup that would focus on empowering women in the tech industry. I'd seen firsthand how few women were in leadership positions in our field. I'd experienced personally how difficult it could be to break into tech without family connections, financial support, or industry knowledge. I wanted to create something meaningful that would help other women like me find their place in this challenging but rewarding world. Aiden was the first person I shared the detailed idea with, and his immediate enthusiasm gave me the courage I needed to believe it could actually work. We spent countless evenings in coffee shops and my small apartment, refining the concept and building a comprehensive business plan that could attract serious investors. The more we worked on it, the more excited I became about the possibility of creating something that could change women's lives while building my own empire. This wasn't just about proving my family wrong anymore. This was about building something meaningful and lasting. I spent 6 intense months working on my pitch, refining every detail until it was perfect. When the day finally came to present it to potential investors, I was absolutely terrified. My hands were shaking, my voice felt weak, and I had no idea if anyone would take me seriously. But when the investors smiled at the end of my presentation and said they were genuinely interested in moving forward, I realized just how far I'd come from that scared girl who'd left home with nothing. I wasn't that broken, desperate person anymore. I had found my voice, my confidence, and my purpose. The presentation room was intimidating, filled with successful businesspeople who could make or break my dreams with a single decision. These were people who'd seen thousands of pitches and funded only the most promising ventures. My hands shook as I clicked through the carefully prepared slides, but my voice remained steady and strong. I talked passionately about the gap in the market, the tremendous potential for growth, and the positive impact we could have on women's lives and careers. I shared statistics about gender inequality in tech and outlined our comprehensive solution. When I finished, the room was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then one investor leaned forward and asked detailed questions about our projected timeline and growth strategy. Another wanted to know about our competitive advantages and market differentiation. They weren't just being polite. They were taking me and my idea seriously. Walking out of that room, I felt like I was floating on air, like anything was possible. Of course, building a successful business wasn't easy, and things weren't always smooth sailing. I faced numerous setbacks along the way that tested my resolve and determination. Funding fell through at the last minute when investors got cold feet. Some early supporters pulled out when they found better opportunities. Potential partners decided to go with more established companies instead of taking a risk on a startup. But I absolutely refused to let these challenges knock me down or discourage me from pursuing my dream. Every failure taught me something valuable. Every rejection was just another lesson in resilience and perseverance. It was all part of the journey, and I was learning to embrace both the highs and lows. The startup world was brutal and unforgiving, with no guarantees of success. For every inspiring success story, there were hundreds of failures and broken dreams. I learned to take rejection as constructive feedback rather than personal defeat. Each no taught me something important about my pitch, my business model, or my approach to investors. I refined my strategy, strengthened my proposals, and kept pushing forward with unwavering determination. Aidan watched me weather these storms with genuine admiration and respect. He told me later that he'd never seen anyone bounce back from disappointment as quickly as I did. But I'd already lost everything once before and not only survived but thrived. These business setbacks seemed relatively small in comparison to what I'd already overcome. Despite my growing success and increasing confidence, reminders of my painful past continued to surface unexpectedly. One day, I received a long handwritten letter from my mom. It was filled with emotional apologies, expressions of guilt, and desperate pleas for reconciliation. She said she missed me terribly and that she couldn't believe I had completely cut them out of my life. She wrote about family loyalty, forgiveness, and second chances. But I didn't respond to her letter, and I had no intention of doing so. It was painfully clear to me that they still saw me as a project to fix or a problem to solve, not as a successful adult who had built an amazing life without them. I had learned through painful experience that I couldn't and wouldn't go back to that toxic, controlling environment. The letter was written on expensive stationery, which somehow made it feel even more insulting and manipulative. She wrote eloquently about family bonds and the importance of forgiveness, but she never truly acknowledged the real hurt they'd caused me. She never explained why they'd been so ready to discard me like garbage or what had fundamentally changed since then. The letter read like a carefully crafted guilt trip designed to manipulate me into coming home and falling back into my old role. But I was no longer the naive, desperate girl who would fall for those transparent tactics. I'd learned to see through their manipulation clearly, and I absolutely wasn't going back to that suffocating environment where my worth was constantly questioned. Despite all the emotional turmoil from my past, my business kept growing steadily and successfully. I hired a small but dedicated team of talented people who shared my vision and values. We started getting the recognition we deserved from industry leaders and publications. But the further I progressed in my career and the more successful I became, the harder it was to ignore the fact that I had built this entire amazing life completely without the family I had once depended on so heavily. I was doing everything on my own, making every important decision independently, and while it was empowering, it was also bittersweet and sometimes lonely. Success felt different when you had no family to share it with, no one who truly understood where you'd come from and how far you'd traveled. My dedicated team celebrated our victories with champagne toasts and team dinners, and they were genuinely happy for our collective success. But they didn't understand the deeper, more personal meaning behind each milestone we achieved. Every new client we signed, every successful campaign we launched, every positive review we received was concrete proof that my family had been completely wrong about my potential and my worth. I was capable of achieving great things, building something meaningful, and I'd done it all without their help, support, or approval. Sometimes I wondered if they followed my progress from afar, if they read about my company in industry publications or heard about my success through mutual connections. Part of me hoped they did, while another part hoped they remained completely ignorant of everything I'd accomplished. Meanwhile, through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances and industry connections, I learned that my family's business empire was slowly but steadily crumbling around them. Their company, which they had worked so hard to build over many years, was failing due to poor management decisions and questionable business practices. I discovered that their unethical methods and shady dealings were finally catching up with them in a big way. It felt like cosmic justice, like karma finally balancing the scales, but I wasn't actively watching their downfall or taking pleasure in their struggles. I had already left that toxic world behind and moved far beyond their limited sphere of influence. The news came to me through mutual acquaintances who didn't know about our family estrangement and mentioned it casually, not knowing how it might affect me emotionally. I felt a strange and complex mix of vindication and sadness when I heard about their troubles. I'd always known their business methods were questionable and probably unsustainable, but I'd been too young and inexperienced to speak up about my concerns. Now their shortcuts, their willingness to bend rules, and their unethical practices were systematically destroying everything they'd built over decades. I wondered privately if they regretted cutting me off now that they desperately needed all the help, support, and fresh perspectives they could get. But I didn't reach out to offer assistance or gloat about their misfortune. Their problems were no longer mine to solve or worry about. I'd moved completely beyond that difficult chapter of my life. When I officially launched my startup to the public, the response was absolutely incredible and exceeded all my expectations. The business completely blew up in the best possible way. Investors came running to us with offers and opportunities. I was invited to speak at major industry conferences and prestigious business events. I was finally becoming the successful, confident woman I had always dreamed of being. But with every major step I took forward, with every milestone I achieved, I couldn't help but feel the emotional emptiness of not having close family to share these victories with. Success was incredibly sweet and rewarding, but it was also surprisingly lonely at times. Industry magazines featured my inspiring story, calling me a role model and inspiration to young entrepreneurs everywhere. I received hundreds of emails from women thanking me for creating new opportunities in the tech industry and for showing them what was possible. Speaking at conferences felt completely surreal and amazing. Standing confidently on stage, looking out at hundreds of engaged faces, I often remembered the scared, broken girl who'd left home years ago with nothing but 2 suitcases and a wounded heart. The transformation was remarkable and complete, but the journey had been incredibly long, difficult, and painful. I genuinely wished I had family members who would be proud of what I'd accomplished, who would celebrate my victories and support me through challenges. But I'd learned through necessity to be my own biggest supporter, cheerleader, and source of validation. The thunderous applause from audiences of strangers filled some of that emotional emptiness, but definitely not all of it. One afternoon, in what would be their final attempt to reconnect, my mother came to see me at my office. She begged me desperately to come home and help them save their failing business. She told me they were losing everything they'd worked for and that they desperately needed my skills, connections, and fresh perspective. But I didn't need them anymore, and I certainly wasn't about to abandon everything I'd built. I had already created my own successful empire, and I wasn't going to throw it all away for people who had never truly believed in my potential. She appeared at my office one busy afternoon, looking significantly older, more desperate, and more defeated than I remembered from our last encounter years earlier. My assistant asked if I wanted to see her, and I almost said no automatically. But curiosity and perhaps a tiny bit of lingering compassion got the better of me. She sat uncomfortably across from my large desk in my successful company's beautiful conference room, surrounded by awards and evidence of my achievements, begging for help from the daughter she'd once dismissed as a worthless liability. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of us, and the silence was heavy with unspoken regret. She offered me a partnership in their struggling, failing business, as if I would ever consider abandoning everything I'd built for their sinking ship. I listened politely but without any real emotional investment, then calmly explained that I wasn't interested in returning to that world. She left looking completely defeated and hopeless, and I felt nothing but profound relief that this chapter was finally, definitively closed. As my success continued to grow and my influence in the industry expanded, I made an important realization about revenge and motivation. The more successful I became, the less I cared about the original idea of getting back at my family for their betrayal. It wasn't about hurting them or proving them wrong anymore. It was about me, about building the life I truly deserved, about creating something meaningful without needing their approval or validation. I realized that my incredible success was indeed the best possible revenge, but not in the way I'd originally imagined. It wasn't about humiliating them or making them suffer for their mistakes. It was about demonstrating clearly that I could not only survive but absolutely thrive on my own terms. Revenge had certainly motivated me in the very beginning, during those dark, desperate early days when I was struggling just to survive. But it wasn't what sustained me through the long, difficult journey to success. The work itself had become its own powerful reward. Helping other women find their place in the tech industry, building something genuinely meaningful and impactful, creating good jobs and valuable opportunities. All of that mattered infinitely more than proving my family wrong about my potential. I'd completely transcended their limited, narrow vision of who I could become and what I could achieve. My worth and my identity weren't dependent on their recognition, approval, or validation anymore. I'd found true fulfillment in my accomplishments and in the positive lives I was able to impact through my meaningful work. When news reached me that their family business had officially collapsed completely, I learned that my entire family had come crashing down with it. They had nowhere left to turn, no resources to fall back on. Their control over family money, their valuable business connections, their social status. All of it had disappeared virtually overnight. But surprisingly, I didn't feel any satisfaction or joy in their dramatic downfall. Instead, I just felt a profound sense of relief and closure. I had finally, completely broken free from their toxic influence and expectations. The news reached me through industry contacts who casually mentioned the bankruptcy filing and investigation. Their company had been thoroughly investigated for serious tax fraud, and everything had unraveled incredibly quickly once the authorities got involved. I wondered privately if they thought about me during those final, desperate days, if they regretted their cruel treatment of me and wished they'd made different choices. But honestly, their struggles and problems felt like ancient history to me now. I was far too busy building my bright future and expanding my business to dwell on their past mistakes and failures. The scared, insecure girl who had once desperately needed their approval and validation was completely gone, replaced by a confident, successful woman who had created her own clear definition of success and happiness. Their financial ruin and social disgrace was simply the final, definitive proof that I'd made absolutely the right choice in leaving that toxic environment when I did. During a moment of quiet reflection in my corner office, I took a step back and realized something truly profound about my journey and transformation. My remarkable success didn't need to be defined by their spectacular failure or downfall. I had built everything meaningful in my life completely on my own, through my own efforts and determination, and that was more than enough. I didn't need them to validate my worth or acknowledge my achievements. This important revelation came during a peaceful moment in my office, looking out at the sprawling city skyline below. I'd achieved everything I'd ever dreamed of and so much more than I'd thought possible. My company was thriving and growing rapidly. My dedicated team was passionate and committed, and I was making a real, measurable difference in people's lives every single day. None of my success had anything to do with my family, their opinion of me, or their belated approval. I'd created something beautiful, meaningful, and lasting from absolutely nothing, and that was my truest accomplishment. Their opinion of my worth no longer mattered at all because I'd learned to value myself appropriately and completely. The scared, rejected girl who'd left home with nothing was now a confident, successful businesswoman who knew her true value and never doubted her capabilities. That incredible transformation was mine alone, earned through years of hard work and perseverance, and no one could ever take it away from me or diminish its significance. With my growing success and financial stability, I decided to start a charitable foundation specifically designed to help women from underprivileged backgrounds break into the tech industry. It felt like my meaningful way of giving back to the world that had given me so many opportunities and blessings. For the first time in many years, I felt like I was finally doing something truly right and important with my life and resources. The foundation quickly became my passionate personal project, something even more meaningful and fulfilling than my business success. I vividly remembered what it felt like to have no support system, no valuable connections, and no one believing in your potential or worth. These women reminded me powerfully of myself during those early, desperate days. Incredibly determined but completely lost, obviously capable but consistently overlooked by society. Providing comprehensive scholarships, dedicated mentorship programs, and job placement services felt like healing my own deep wounds while simultaneously helping others avoid similar pain and struggle. The first graduation ceremony brought tears of joy to my eyes as I watched 20 bright, capable women receive their certificates in web development and programming. I saw myself clearly in their hopeful faces, the mixture of excitement and fear, the determination and uncertainty, the dreams and the realistic concerns about their futures. Knowing that I'd played a role in changing their lives for the better gave me a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. Through extensive therapy and personal growth work, I came to understand that I didn't need closure from my family, and I didn't need their apologies or explanations. I had successfully moved on from that painful chapter of my life. I had genuinely healed from their betrayal and rejection. The family I once thought I desperately needed was no longer a part of my story or my identity, and I was completely okay with that reality. Therapy had helped me understand that true healing didn't require forgiveness from them or even forgiveness toward them on my part. It required accepting what had happened, learning from the experience, and consciously choosing to build something infinitely better from the broken pieces. I'd learned that family isn't always about blood relations or legal obligations. Real family consists of the people who consistently support you, genuinely believe in your potential, and celebrate your successes without jealousy or manipulation. My carefully chosen family included Aiden, my loyal and dedicated employees, my foundation ments, and the growing network of strong, inspiring women I'd met throughout my journey. These relationships were based on mutual respect, genuine care, and shared values, not on obligation, manipulation, or conditional love. I'd created exactly the kind of support system I'd always needed and deserved, filled with people who valued me for who I truly was, not for what I could do for them or how I could benefit their agenda. In what felt like a scene from a dramatic movie, they showed up at my office building one final time. Broken, defeated, and desperate. My mom, my dad, and even Kara, all of them together. They had absolutely nothing left in their lives. I didn't say much during their visit. I just looked at them calmly, realizing with crystal clarity that I had already moved completely on from this chapter. They were still trapped in their world of manipulation, blame, and dysfunction, but I had escaped that toxic environment long ago and built something infinitely better. They sat uncomfortably in my elegant conference room like strangers, which in many important ways they truly were. Years had passed since I'd last seen them, and we'd all changed dramatically, though not necessarily for the better in their case. They looked smaller somehow, physically and emotionally diminished by their failures, poor choices, and deep regrets. They spoke awkwardly about family bonds, second chances, and the importance of forgiveness, but their words felt completely empty and meaningless to me. I listened politely, the way I would to any unexpected visitors, but I felt absolutely no emotional connection to these people. They were definitely part of my past, but they had no place whatsoever in my bright future. When they finally left, looking disappointed and empty-handed, I calmly returned to my important work. I had a foundation board meeting to prepare for, expansion plans to review, and a successful future to continue building. I walked into my spacious corner office one morning, looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace with my life and choices. I had done it. I had succeeded on my own terms in my own way, and that was truly all that mattered to me. The bustling city stretched out endlessly below me, full of infinite possibilities and exciting opportunities. My calendar was packed with important meetings, speaking engagements, and foundation events that would impact countless lives. I'd built a life that exceeded even my wildest dreams from those early desperate days when I was just trying to survive. My phone buzzed constantly with congratulations on our latest industry award for workplace diversity and inclusion. My talented team was efficiently preparing for our ambitious expansion into 3 new major cities. 20 more deserving women would graduate from our foundation program next month, ready to start meaningful careers. I wasn't the scared, rejected girl anymore who'd left home with nothing but pain and determination. I was Mira, the successful entrepreneur who'd proven beyond any doubt that family isn't about blood relations. It's about who stands by you when the world seems darkest and most hopeless. I'd found my true family in the people who believed in me unconditionally, and I'd built an empire entirely on my own terms. The girl who was once called a liability had become a force to be reckoned with, and that transformation was the sweetest victory of all.